Hello and welcome to this 19th t12t meetup. T12t or tillgänglighet is the Swedish word for accessibility, or A11Y as it is shortened for English. My name is Erik Gustafsson and I am an accessibility specialist at Digitalist. Please read the code of conduct that is in the meetup and the description on YouTube. You will be able to ask questions in the chat, and all of the speakers will participate and answer in the chat.
Hello, I'm Joe Devon, the co-founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I wanted to thank T12T for running an accessibility meetup and inviting me to say a few words. So the way that GAAD started, it really was back when I was a programmer working on American Idol, which is a pretty big, which was at the time by far the #1 TV show in America. And as I was working on it, I ran into a video by a program manager by the name of Victor Tsaran, who was working at Yahoo at the time, and he was demoing a screen reader. And as he was looking at the homepage of Yahoo, it was the first time I had seen a screen reader where the page was being read aloud so that he was able to see it, because when you're blind, you can't use a mouse and obviously you can't see the screen. So I was blown away by it for a couple of reasons. One being that as a programmer, it was solving a problem and it was such a cool technology. But on the other hand, I also realized that I didn't know how to make sure that pages were accessible to people, and for screen readers particularly at the time. That was before I knew that there are a lot more aspects to accessibility. So that percolated in my head for a few years, and I figured I hadn't really heard people talking about it, so I figured that it wasn't a big thing when it came to developers. And so it percolated in my head for a few years. And then my dad started getting older, and my dad was brilliant. He spoke 10 languages, was really a genius. And as it was painful to watch him lose his hearing and his vision. And then when he tried to go to the bank, it took all day because he couldn't drive, obviously. And then he couldn't hear, so he couldn't bank by the phone. So he really should have found the solution in online banking. However, his bank was inaccessible. So I was extremely frustrated because it really took away his independence. So I wrote a blog post proposing that we create a Global Accessibility Awareness Day, because I realized that some developer probably didn't even realize that they were taking away the independence of people who needed an accessible bank. And I didn't expect much to come of it, but in fact, it turned into this crazy viral event, which is now the third Thursday of every May, and we're in the 9th year. And the event back in 2019 had a Twitter reach of 195 million unique users, which is a pretty mind-blowing figure. And I'm just going to share, I only have a few minutes to share with you. So I'm just going to give you a few moments that were pretty special. And the first one I'd say is that in year 3, the same bank, even though I never mentioned their name publicly, the bank that prompted writing that blog post came back and they said that they're doing an internal event. Please don't publicize it because we know we have issues with accessibility, but we're going to be working on it internally. So that was a pretty crazy moment. I've never had that kind of impact on an organization from the inside, let alone from a blog post on some obscure database blog, turning into this event that that gets to a bank and makes a difference. A few other notable moments are that Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, started asking that there be events all week in every single Apple store globally. He started hosting concerts on campus, including with Stevie Wonder. Microsoft released an Xbox adaptive controller on the day. And then all these big tech companies started changing their homepages for the day from IBM, Microsoft, Apple, Verizon, and more. And we got a lot of tech press. So this was a pretty great moment for us to see this happening. And then, despite all of this great stuff, one thing happened is that we had the Blind Onion. I don't know if you're familiar with the Onion, but it's a popular satire, and this Blind Onion is a satirical Twitter Twitter account, and they tweeted out, "The world eagerly anticipates participating in the next 364 days of global accessibility oblivion." Basically, making fun of GAD, but more about the fact that despite all of the notice that GAD gets, the web is really inaccessible. And I bring this up because rather than take it negatively, I took it as a challenge to really try and understand what is the state of accessibility for the web. And so I started planning to do a state of accessibility report, but actually a company called WebAIM and Jared Smith created the very same report like a couple of months before we were going to release it, and we just decided to collaborate with them on doing a state of accessibility report. So that was last year, and unfortunately the numbers are pretty bad. Last year, 97.8% of the top million homepages are inaccessible, with an average of 59.6 errors per page. And this year it even got a little bit worse, with 98.1% of pages inaccessible and 60.9 average errors per page. So we're doing some activity around a GAAD pledge, which we will announce shortly. And we're really trying to attack this problem and really try to make it so that next year we will see better figures. So I bring all of this up because it's all of us that are in it together, and it's people like you who are putting together this event, and people like you that are attending the event and being a part of it that are going to make the change. None of this would be possible if not for the community, because the community is what made it so big. So with that, I will say thank you to all of you, and please take the GAAD pledge. Enjoy. Have a happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Bye-bye.
So, hello and welcome, Tommy Olsson. Please, can you tell us who you are?
Yes, of course. Thank you for letting me be here. My name is Tommy Olsson, and I work as a specialist at the Agency for Digital Government in Sweden. We are the monitoring agency for the Web Accessibility Directive in Sweden.
Welcome. And you are going to demonstrate to us a new tool that you have developed.
That's right. I'm going to share my screen here so you can see it. There. Yes. As you know, as a part of the Web Accessibility Directive and the national legislation, every public sector body is required to publish one or more accessibility statements for their services. The template from the Commission is rather difficult to use, so I built this tool to hopefully make it a little bit easier. It's currently available in English or Swedish. I'm going to show you the English version right now, but it's simple to just change the language to Swedish and proceed from here. I'm also going to use a pre-populated file here to save some time. So I upload it and step to the main interface. As you can see, we have a tabbed interface with 5 tabs and a couple of buttons at the bottom.
Excuse me, could you please resize, maybe zoom in a little bit so we make use of the screen? Thank you very much.
Right. Right. At the bottom, as I said, we have 2 buttons here. We have the save form, which you can use at any time during this process to save the information onto your hard drive as an XML file, and then upload it as I just did. And we have the generate statement button, which we will use when everything is filled in. The first tab is the organization tab, where we filled in the name of the public agency, the public sector body, contact information optional, and a formal endorsement is also optional. We have to provide a feedback mechanism in the statement according to the directive. So in this tab, you enter the URL for the feedback mechanism, and you are also able to enter a typical response time if you can guarantee something like 2 working days or a week or whatever. It's an optional field. The third tab, digital service, is where we put in the information regarding the name and type of the digital service, which can be a website or a mobile application. We have a name for it, which can be the domain name or some other name for the service. A mobile application, you have to specify a version number and a publication date. For a website, there is no version, but you can and are encouraged to specify publication dates. If you invoke an exemption for a disproportionate burden, according to Section 12 in the Swedish legislation, you are required to document the content that is inaccessible and why you consider it to be a disproportionate burden. There may also be some content on your website which is outside of the scope of the regulations, according to the Section 9 in the Swedish regulations. And that should also be documented here so that users will know what it is. By starting lines with a dash or hyphen sign, you will produce a bulleted list in the generated statement. If you have a longer text in a text area, you can just put in a blank line and keep typing to produce paragraphs. The fourth tab is the method tab, describing the assessment method, which can be self-assessment if you do it yourself, third-party assessment if some external party has tested a website, or other is probably not applicable in Sweden, but it's a possibility in the Commission's template if you have another approved assessment method in that country. You can specify who made the assessment. It's not required, but the assessment date is required. You can also provide a link describing the assessment method, and it's very good if you can provide a link to the evaluation report, of course. And the complicated tab in this one is the one called compliance, which is where you specify how you comply to the legislation. There are two options. The one shown here is used by filling out a checklist. If you have a WCAG checklist from an assessment, you can use that to put in detailed information here. As an option, you can also just write your own description of anything that is not in compliance with the regulations. The help text on the right-hand side will show the text from WCAG, and basically you have to fill in information for all the 48 criteria that are encompassed by the law. You may specify an estimated deadline when you plan to achieve full accessibility or full compatibility with the law. For every state, for every criterion, you have a mapping to the 10 usage situations according to Appendix B in the EN standard. For instance, 1.1.1 is mapped to 4 usage situations without vision, limited vision, without hearing, limited hearing. And if you specify anything but fully compliant here, you have to enter information in one or more of these boxes. The normal way to do this, if you have a reasonably compliant website, is to use this navigation to go to the ones where you have problems, and you specify here partially compliant or not compliant, and you fill in information of how it affects various usage situations. And when you're done, you can just go to one that is fully compliant, and then you just click apply for all remaining, and it will fill in this status for every criterion that does not yet have another status. So that is basically what you do. You go through this, and when you're done or when you feel like it, you can click save the form. You get the file manager, typical from your operating system, and you can save this XML file somewhere on your hard drive. And when you're finished, satisfied with everything, you click generate statement, and you get the completed accessibility statement with some cookie cutter text filled in with placeholders from the form. If you have opted for using a checklist, as we did here, the tool will generate anchor links to for each usage situation. So you can click, for instance, on usage without hearing, and you will come directly to the description of the issues that the person without hearing can reasonably expect on this site. There's some more standard text about what happens if it's not accessible, contact information, how to report accessibility problems using the feedback mechanism, about the enforcement procedure, and a link to DIGG's complaint form. And then we have the non-compliance with the regulations, which is known accessibility problems on this site. We specified an estimated deadline, and that will appear here. If we have invoked an exemption for disproportionate burden, that text will appear here. And if we have content without the scope from the regulations, it will appear here, as you see, as a bulleted list, because we started the lines with hyphens. And finally, information about the assessment method and testing, linking to the method and linking to the report, and today's date as the last update date. And what you can do is to save this as an HTML file on your hard drive. You can then either edit that HTML file to add your company or agency logo and CSS and whatnot, or you can copy and paste information from that template or from that statement into your content management system.
Okay, very
And
good.
that's about it.
And did you plan to release this within a few days?
Yes, our plan is to make it public on the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which this year is on the 21st of May, Thursday, 21st of May.
Very good.
And we will then also publish a news story on digg.se with the URL for this and everything.
Very good. And you also have, I think, some template documents for those who do not want to use the generator.
Yes, that's right. There's a Word document and an HTML equivalent on digg.se, which we've had there for almost a year now, I think. So if you don't want to use this tool, you can use those templates instead. And they built up along the same lines as this one, which is built based on the version made by gov.uk in Britain.
Okay, so thank you very much, Tommy, for appearing, and looking forward to talking to you again on this interesting topic. And bye.
Okay, thank you.
Hello everybody, thanks for your interest in my talk, and also big thanks to Eric for inviting me to be part of this meetup here. I will have to switch to my presentation now, so you will not be able to see my face, but I hope that the content that I'm showing is in the end even more interesting than seeing me here. Before I start, I want to tell you a tiny little bit about myself. My name is Nils Binder. I work at a company called 9 Elements. We are based in Bochum, Germany, building digital products and services. If you want to find out more, you find us at 9elements.com. There's also a blog at 9elements.com/blog where you find some of the articles that I wrote in the past. If you have any questions that you want to ask me maybe after this talk, you find me on Twitter. And yeah, feel free to contact me there if you have any questions. At 9 Elements, I work as a front-end designer. That means I have two main responsibilities. First one is designing nice stuff, designing website layouts. I do this mostly in Sketch. And then on the other hand, I'm a developer dealing with HTML, CSS, and a little bit of presentational JavaScript. And I want to show you now how these two personalities can work closely together. So here we have a bit of layout that Designer Me has done. We have two types of headlines here and then two paragraphs. The word up there, Barrierefreiheit, that means accessibility in German. And you may know that in the German language we can build very, very long words, and sometimes this is really hard for a designer because hyphenation in CSS is not really well supported, and this can really get in the way. So let's look at the font sizes here that Designer Me has used. We have a base font size for the paragraphs here of 16 pixels. And then I had a modular scale here in place. That means I multiplied this base font size by 1.5 two times to get the size for this headline here, and multiplied it by 1.5 again to get the size for the large headline. And everything looks nice. Handing this over to Developer Me, and Developer Me wants to build an accessible website out of this. And because it needs to be accessible, what is really important here is the ability to increase the font size. I want to make sure people can zoom in, maybe because this 16 pixels here are not large enough to be readable. And I want to provide two options for zooming. First one would be the browser zoom, and the second one is to increase the font size on the preferences of the browser itself. Now, after some time, Developer Me is ready and has translated this to a website. And we want to see how does it look when I increase the font size by 200% from 16 pixels to 32 pixels. Well, now it looks something like this. All the fonts are doubled. We have 32 pixels as the base font size, and then 72 and 108 for the large headline on the top. Showing this to Designer Me and asking, do you really think this is how it should look? And Designer Me says, no, not at all. And you could have told me before that the base font size could be increased to 32. I would have used a different modular scale from the beginning. So instead of multiplying it by 1.5, maybe I had chosen something like 1.25. Then for this headline here, we have 50 pixels, and multiplying it by 1.25 again, we'd have 62.5 pixels for the large headline, and everything is still readable. And to be honest, if you told me to design a mobile layout, I would have done nearly the same. So here we start with a 16 pixel base font again, and multiplying it by 1.25 two times gives me 25 pixels for this headline here, and multiplied by 1.25 again gives me 31.25 pixels for the large headline, and this looks nice as well. Now Developer Me coming in and saying, well, everything looks great, so now we can get rid of this 1.5 modular scale and use 1.25 all over. So on a tablet layout, it will look something like this. And finally, one last time, designer me coming in, looking at this and said, yeah, this looks nice, but let me be honest again. If I compare this to my initial layout, I think this one with a larger modular scale, for this device, it really looks a little more appealing, and I like this more than the one on the left. So, what can we learn from this discussion here? I think it boils down to this little sentence here saying the size ratio between individual text elements should depend on the ratio of the browser's base font size to the viewport width. For those of you who prefer to look at numbers instead of text, let's look at this way here. If we have a viewport width of 640 pixels and divided by the base font size of 16 pixels, we get a ratio of 40. If I increase the base font size to 32 pixels, the ratio is only 20, and this is the same ratio if I had reduced the viewport width to 320 pixels. When I now look at this at a viewport width of 320 pixels and an increased font size to 32 pixels, the ratio is only 10, so it's even lower. Now I wanted to see if I can find a way of implementing this ratio here with pure CSS. Bad news is I didn't find a way, and I will show you why this is. When I look at this division here, I can replace the 640 pixels by 100 viewport width, and I can also replace the 16 pixels, the base font size, by 1 rem. But when I use this in a CSS calc function, something like this, it doesn't work. It throws an error because you cannot divide two different units. I needed to have the computed pixel value of both of these, and this is sadly not possible with CSS. I did find a solution though, and I'm very excited to show you my solution in a minute. But before I do this, I want to point out that something like this could maybe give you a good solution for the problem as well. The min, max, and clamp functions are quite well supported in all major browsers right now. And you could say something here. This sets a minimum font size of 1.5 rem, a maximum font size of 2.5 rem, and then a desired font size of 1 rem, and additional there is 1 viewport width. So don't know, I only tried this for some time, and I think this could lead to a good solution as well. Okay, now let's look at the solution that I made here. I'm here in CodePen. I will send you the link to this pen after the talk, so you can play around with what I did here. I will explain section by section what's going on here. Starting with the HTML, this is really straightforward. It's just a container and then some headlines and paragraphs, nothing more. And don't look at this thing down here. I will explain later what this does, but it's not really important for the example. The CSS is a little more interesting here. I have some custom properties here. First thing is I have my modular scale, and I set my modular scale to 1.2. This looks a little nicer here. And remember, designer me said, yeah, 1.2, it is okay. It could be better, but it's okay. And so this is my fallback for everyone who has JavaScript disabled, and I make sure it looks okay like this. Then I calculate some font sizes. Medium is just 1 rem, and large is 1 rem multiplied by the modular scale, and this goes on here, multiplying it with the modular scale multiple times. The rest is just font sizes and paddings, margins, and one pseudo element to create this little line here under the headline. And this looks nice. It is okay. And when I head over to the preferences of Firefox, I can set my base font size to 32 pixels. And you see, still looks nice. Most of it is, I think, quite readable. You can distinguish the headlines from the body copy. And I think this is okay. So let's set this back to 16 pixels and look what's going on in the JavaScript. I'm not much of a JavaScript guy, but these kinds of things is, yeah, I'm comfortable with doing this. And I will try to explain quite easily what I did here. First I get the root element, which is the HTML element. Then I get its font size in pixels. Then I get the viewport width in pixels. And finally, by dividing the viewport width by the font size, I can get the ratio. And this is the important thing here that I need. And I get this as a unitless value. So keep that in mind, we have the ratio saved up here. Now I have this new variable here, a modular scale set to 1.1. You may see this is even lower than 1.2. But I thought let's enhance it in both ways. If JavaScript is enabled, maybe there are times when we need a modular scale that's even below 1.2. And now I'm coming back to this ratio, checking is it above 40? If it is, I can set my modular scale to 1.5. If it's only above 30, I set it to 1.3. And if it's above 20, I set my modular scale to 1.2. If none of these here apply, my modular scale is left at 1.1. And finally, I'm updating my custom property here, setting the custom property modular scale to the variable modular scale I defined up here. Again, this part here is just for this little widget. You can ignore it right now. And I need to call this function. I defined this function up here and I need to call it, and I do this whenever the browser is resizing. So I have this event listener, and when it resizes, I call this function. And now you can see when I resize this, and now this widget here that I talked about quite a lot is updating. And you see the base font size here, you get the viewport width, and you see the calculated ratio down here. And you see it's above 40, so we have a ratio, modular scale of 1.5 here. And when I reduce it, once it's below 40, we have 1.3, and this goes down. And yeah, this looks nice here when resizing it. And again, I'd make my check here, changing the font size to 32 pixels. And whoa, here now we have a ratio of 34, so we only have a modular scale of 1.3. You can see here above 30, and it's 1.3. But when I get really big here, so now I have a viewport width of above 1,400, my ratio is 46, and now the modular scale is at 1.5 again. And it goes down, and here I'm below 20, and you can see now that the modular scale is at 1.1. And I think this is quite a good solution. You can still distinguish these two headlines here, because this one has this nice little decoration down here. And all the text is readable. Even this long word here fits in to this screen. Well, that's it. I hope you liked what I had to say, and I'm really interested in your comments and questions right now. So thanks again for listening.
Hi, this is Sheri Byrne-Haber. I'm really pleased to have been invited by Eric and the folks who organized this meeting today to give you a little bit of a global accessibility legal update. So I happen to have a perfect storm of a background to be in accessibility. I'm a wheelchair user with a deaf daughter. I started off with a degree in computer science. I became a lawyer, and then I got an MBA. So I kind of have a 360-degree view of accessibility. From all perspectives, I can see why it's important, but what it costs. I have to give the standard US legal disclaimer. Please don't rely on anything in this deck as legal advice. I'm not your lawyer. You need to get your own lawyer. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Canadian accessibility law. I'm Canadian originally, so this is something that really interests me. I'll touch for a second on the EU, but really focus on the UK law. You guys already know the EU law, but the UK stuff might be interesting to you. And then the law that I'm closest to, the US law, we'll look at California law and new litigation trends. So first of all, the Accessible Canada Act, which is also known as Bill C-81, was passed last summer. So who does it cover? It covers Parliament, the Government of Canada, the military, and what we call regulated entities, which is the federal regulated private sector. So that's largely transportation, broadcasting, the RCMP, banking, insurance, and telecom. There's an interesting clause in the Accessible Canada Act, which says that the development and revision of accessibility standards must be done with the objective of achieving the highest level of accessibility for persons with disabilities. Since this was passed last July after WCAG 2.1 came into effect, my interpretation of this is that the standards will have a phased-in approach using WCAG 2.1 at level AA as the standard. So the proposed timeline right now extends all the way to 2026. The details of the implementation have been somewhat delayed due to coronavirus. This is an accessibility law that encompasses much, much more than digital accessibility. It includes built environment, so physical accessibility, employment, which includes job opportunities, standard ICT, which would be like Section 508 in the United States, any procurement of goods and services, any delivery of goods and services, and transportation. So we've got several different things to look at with respect to the EU. First, we've got EN 301549, which regulates public sector bodies, and that's non-commercial bodies governed by public law, associations, state, regional, and local authorities. So the hard deadline kicks in for that September 23rd of this year. Everybody's probably aware of all that and is tired to death of hearing about it. The European Accessibility Act is still a little bit up in the air. The regulations that are in place require member states to adopt and publish their own implementation laws by June 28th of 2022, and 3 years later, by June 28th, 2025, applying those laws nationally. Now, the commissions could cite compliance with EN 301549 as equivalent to compliance for the EAA. Currently, 301549 only applies to websites and apps. So what that would do is it would take the EAA and effectively extend EN 301549 to products and services above and beyond websites and apps. A lot of people suspect that that's what's going to happen because it's the least amount of work that's compliant with the overarching regulation. But since we're so far away from June 28th of 2022, nothing has really happened yet with respect to the member states actually doing the adoption. So that's going to be the key, and we will need to follow that closely to see how each individual member state implements the EAA. And then finally, we've got renegade countries like Sweden. Sweden came out with a statement from the procurement agency saying that goods and services must be available to everybody regardless of their ability to function. That actually goes above and beyond both the EAA and EN 301549, and there's no reason why other countries couldn't do that as well. We're seeing a situation with COVID where people with disabilities are being hurt even more than people without disabilities. For example, in the US, we can't get groceries delivered because not all the grocery delivery apps are accessible. We can't, 41 out of 50 in the US of the unemployment websites are inaccessible, yet all of the unemployment offices are closed, so people can't go into the office to make their claims. This is really a serious problem, and I think countries in the EU and states in the United States making their local regulations stronger than the federal regulations is going to be important to digital accessibility law moving in a positive direction going forward. So with respect to Brexit, EN 301549 was implemented by a local law in the UK. That's true for all of the European Accessibility Acts. Each member state has to implement that as their own local law. What that did is that means there's a local law. It's not that the UK was relying on EN 301549, they implemented it themselves. Brexit does not automatically cancel the UK implemented law. It would have to be explicitly repealed. Chances of that happening, it requires the British Parliament getting their act together. I don't see it happening. Even if it did happen, we've got a couple of things that also exist in the UK that are independent of EN 301549. BS 8878, which has been the standard since I think sometime after 2010, exists as a fallback with reliance on WCAG 2.0. And then there's an ISO standard that uses 2.1 as its basis is ISO-30071. So that is also a possibility. So we've got 4 cases in the US that are really important with respect to litigation. 4 of these cases, all 4 of these cases are against private entities. These are all stores. In the US, we call them public accommodations. So they do explicitly come under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they all involve selling something. Domino's sells pizza. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case, and it left the Court of Appeals ruling in place, which mandated accessibility. Domino's is still fighting it, so you haven't heard the last of this one. The Hooters case, which is a restaurant chain, cited that you can be sued multiple times by different plaintiffs, even if you're in the middle of remediating. So you can be sued by one party, enter into a private settlement agreement, and while you're in that settlement agreement solving the issues, you can get sued by a different party. The only time this is not the case is when the first party was a class action lawsuit. In the US, some lawsuits are class action, which means they represent everybody who has been discriminated against in that way. Other cases are individual, so you have to look at those carefully to figure out what the implications are. But for the most part, I would say maybe 80% of the accessibility lawsuits in the US are individual, possibly higher. There have been a few class action lawsuits, which means if you've been sued by an individual, especially one of the people who've made a profession out of suing people, you can be sued by other individuals in the same situation. There is a third case called Winn-Dixie. Winn-Dixie is a large grocery chain in the US. Think of it kind of like our own Aldi. And the Southern District of Florida ruling mandated accessibility for Winn-Dixie. Why is that important? Florida is a really conservative court. So the feeling amongst lawyers is that if Florida is going to mandate accessibility, everybody's going to mandate accessibility. And finally, another interesting case was the Gnc case. Gnc is a vitamin company, and they have stores where they sell all Gnc products. They also sell in various different pharmacies. So in that case, they tried to claim that their IT head was an accessibility expert. And all of the accessibility testimony got thrown out because the court decided that he wasn't an expert. He'd only taken a couple of accessibility webinars. He wasn't certified. He didn't have any training. So the core component of that particular case is whoever you claim is an accessibility expert, if you get sued in the US, they better damn well be an accessibility expert. So California law is basically the same as Swedish law in that California is always on the cutting edge of accessibility and disability related protections for its citizens. So there are three things that make California law really important. We're 10% of the United States in terms of population. Lots of people either do business from California or do business in California. So any state in the US can pass laws that are more protective than the federal laws. The federal laws are a floor. So first of all, we have something called the Unruh Act in California, and it's a $4,000 per ADA violation minimum fine. The reason why that's important is because the ADA itself, as a federal law, only allows you to get injunctive relief, meaning you can force the company to do something. There's no monetary damages involved. This is why 42% of the cases in the United States are filed in California, because there's a financial incentive for the plaintiffs here. They get $4,000 per violation. Secondly, we've got the California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA, which mandates that all privacy pages have to be compliant with 2.1 AA. This is the first law in the United States that mandates 2.1. And it took effect January 1st, but they gave everybody 6 months to get caught up. And so July 1st is when the Attorney General in the state of California may start going after people who are not complying with these 2.1 requirements for privacy pages. There's a third piece of legislation in California that I'm actually working on called AB, stands for Assembly Bill 2123. It has not been passed. It is currently on hold, but was active as of a week ago. So this is not a hold, meaning it's in some corner where we're waiting for it to die. The only reason why it's on hold is because the legislature is focusing on coronavirus bills right now. What AB 2123 proposes is that there are statutory damages if a website fails to provide equally effective communication or facilitate full and equal enjoyment of goods and services. So what does that mean? It kind of tries to clarify things to prevent lawsuits using 2.1 as a standard. Now, it says internet website, and I'm making air quotes around the term website. It actually includes mobile apps in the definition of the website. What it's trying to do is it's trying to eliminate the people who are serial plaintiffs who are filing hundreds of lawsuits against hundreds of different companies by saying that the people actually have to prove that they've been harmed, that they couldn't enjoy the goods and services. But it's also making the standard higher, but easily measurable by saying that WCAG 2.1 AA is the standard. In terms of trends in the United States litigation, the first trend that we started seeing about 15 months ago was employees suing employers for discrimination based on lack of accessibility. The first case to come out was Bartilson versus Miami-Dade County. It was $1 million verdict in favor of the plaintiff, as many of these cases are, where the employer, the Miami-Dade County, was required to provide the woman assistance and JAWS scripts and what have you until everything became 2.1, or it might have been 2.0 compliant, until everything became accessible. She was a blind psychologist in the school district. Second trend we're seeing is whistleblower lawsuits. So there was a lawsuit against a contractor. Conduit is owned by Xerox Corporation, and Conduit contracted with the state of California to produce a Parks and Recreation Department website. And they said it was going to be accessible, but they didn't test it very well. And when the state of California refused to enforce that contract clause, Mr. Bashan, who is legally blind, sued based on a whistleblower complaint, saying that Conduit effectively committed fraud against the state of California by saying that they were going to make the website compliant and not following through. So that case has been allowed to proceed. It's overcome the first hurdle. It will be interesting to see what the outcome is. Another trend that we've seen is Braille gift cards. There were about 200 lawsuits filed at the end of 2019 about Braille cards, about gift cards, apologies, that don't support Braille. The courts are getting really fed up with cookie cutter lawsuits. And in particular, the courts wrote in Dominguez versus Banana Republic, which was the first case to get a written ruling, that the plaintiff's attorneys were doing a terrible job, that they're not specifically alleging harm, and as a result that they were not going to interpret the law to include Braille gift cards.
Hi, my name's Bryce Johnson. I work on accessibility and inclusive design for Microsoft devices. I'm one of the inventors of the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which today I'm going to show you how it can empower gamers with limited mobility to play. But first, before we get started, I want to show you some wonderful clips of people out there. The Xbox Adaptive Controller started at a hackathon in 2015. It was the brainchild of my colleague Matt Height, who was working with a charity at the time called Warfighter Engaged, who made controllers for people with disabilities. And Matt basically saw a need to create a device that could help people quickly create controllers that kind of fit them. And so our inspiration was always to create a device that adapted to the individual. And from that, we had a powerful kind of recognition from working with these folks. Ken Jones of Warfighter Engaged brought us Sergeant Josh Price to the hackathon in 2015. And Josh showed us his setup that he used with Ken, and it was really powerful and inspirational for us to understand how people needed adapted controls and how they needed controls to fit him. And to be honest, what the challenge was with our traditional controller. So the thing about our traditional controller that you have to recognize is that this has been optimized around a use case that assumes that you're going to use it one way. It assumes that you're going to use it with two hands. It assumes that you have thumbs that are fluid and have a range of motion. It assumes that you have 4 fingers that can basically reach these bumpers and triggers. It assumes that you are able to fluidly hit all the buttons on the controller and that you have the strength to hold it. And it was important for us to recognize that if you couldn't do this, that it wasn't your fault, it was the controller's fault, and we had to do something about it. When we designed the Xbox Adaptive Controller, we saw that assistive technology always strived to be really powerful, and sometimes the way that they went about it made it really complicated. So we really wanted the device to be simple as possible. And the way that we approached that was to actually make sure that each control was exported on the controller in a really kind of simple way. But in an unusual sort of twist, what that meant was that we added 19 ports here on the back for simplicity. So what I mean by that is there's 17 buttons on an Xbox game controller. Every button has a corresponding port here on the back of the adaptive controller that you can externalize to a switch, like one of these Logitech gaming switches. So we wanted it to be simple enough so that people could plug in and unplug switches from the controller without having to go into software to remap it all the time. Now that doesn't mean that we don't have software remapping. I'm going to get to that a bit later. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to create a device that people, if they just needed a couple things that are really simple, they didn't have to go in and learn how to use a new piece of software to use the controller. Another thing that we recognized really early on was that it was important to give people sort of more flexibility in the devices that they used. Having to buy switches and bespoke things just to use the adaptive controller was never our intent from the beginning. So we had a feature that really helped us create something that could be used by a lot of folks. And so what that feature is, it's called Copilot. Now, Copilot allows you to take 2 controllers, whether it's like an adaptive controller or a regular controller or 2 standard controllers, and basically pair them together to be a single controller on the system. And what this allows people to do, it allows you to use the controller that you have if you only need a little bit of extra kind of functionality. And I'll show you a quick video here of someone who uses Copilot. So you can see that person uses the controller on their face, and then they use the adaptive controller to add buttons around their face, which is actually a really powerful way for them to use these two things together. Another thing that we thought about with Copilot was that you could actually have someone with limited mobility, if they could only press one or two buttons or use one joystick, you could have them do the majority of the fun parts of a game, and you could enlist a co-pilot. You could enlist someone to take a typical controller who doesn't have limited mobility, and they could basically help you kind of go through a game. Now, that doesn't mean that they're playing for you. What it means is that they're acting as your co-pilot. They're doing the things to help you kind of move forward. And again, like we always encourage folks to basically give the fun stuff to people out there. So, you know, if a person can only use one joystick and press one button, then that's aim and shoot, and they can enlist a co-pilot to do everything else. And I've got a video here that demonstrates that, which is from All Access Life. They're a wonderful group of guys that basically show how they use Copilot.
What's going on, All Access Lifers? Brad's over at my place today for a big old gaming day. We're gonna be playing some Fortnite for you guys today, using Brad's Xbox Adaptive Controller. And we'll be using an accessibility feature that Microsoft has called Copilot, which essentially allows two controllers to merge together and act as one. Let's open this up. Okay, start hitting, start hitting. Okay, hit. There he is, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him, yes, yes! Oh, let's go to that one. Okay, we gotta go to this one. You have to open fast. You have to open this one fast. Open, open, open. Okay, pick that up, pick that up. Okay, now get ready to shoot. Shoot, shoot, shoot. Hold out, yeah, hold it down, hold it down, hold it down. Come on, come on. Yes, yes, we got him. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So I said before that the Xbox Adaptive Controller has powerful software remapping. Let's get into it. We start by going to the Start menu and opening up the Xbox Accessories app. Here we have the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and now we click the Configure button to go in and check it out. On the side here are all the profiles that are shared to my account, everything I've ever made, but currently the device has 0 profiles. So we're going to take a profile and we're going to assign it to a slot on the device. We're going to take this GAAD profile and we're going to put it in slot 1. There's 3 slots on the device, and now it's in there, and you can take this controller to any Xbox or PC and it'll have that profile embedded on the controller. Now let's edit it. So in here I have a number of things set already, pre-configured. The first thing we're going to look at is a shift button. So shift I've assigned to the X2 button, and basically it is like shift on a keyboard. It allows one button or joystick to become a different value when shift is held. So you can see that I have some remapping already. The large icon is the primary button, and the smaller icon is the shifted value. And sticks can also be shifted. Right now what I've done is I've set the primary stick to actually be swapped. So the right stick is actually the left stick by default. And I know that's a bit confusing, but you'll see how it works in the game. So right stick, when shifted, is actually right stick. Okay, and that's that profile. This is a shift button. So when I press this, I swap this stick from left stick to right stick, and I swap a bunch of buttons. So if you hear this click while I'm kind of playing, you know I'm shifting, and I'll tell you when I'm shifting too. Here is an overhead view of what I'm going to show you today using the Xbox Adaptive Controller. So in the center here we have our Xbox Adaptive Controller. We have our Logitech Gaming Kit, pieces from our Logitech Gaming Kit, just 2 buttons out of 12, and one of the mounting pads. We have our PDP one-handed joystick here, which is plugged in right over here on the right side of the controller. And this thing that's kind of looming up here is that button I was telling you about. It's on a mic stand. So one of the things that I like to explore is how to create assistive technology kind of inexpensively. So this button is basically a mic stand, which is very inexpensive. There's an arcade button that's glued into the microphone holder. And then on the end of that arcade button, I've glued basically this little rubber ball to give it a little bit of a click there. And I'm going to use that with my face today. Okay, let's play some Minecraft with one hand. First thing we're going to do, we're going to go into settings. Then we're going to go to controller settings. And we're going to turn on auto jump. Auto jump is something that's really important. It's really, when you're using a one-handed setup, it works really well. Then we're going to go into the marketplace. And we've introduced some educational content that comes from our Minecraft education collection. These are some of the educational titles. Today we're going to use Washington, D.C. And we're going to create this world. So now we're in this Washington, D.C. Minecraft world, and I'm going to show you how I use it using one hand with the Xbox Adaptive Controller. So I have my PDP one-handed joystick here, and right now it's set to walk using the left stick, so forward and back, left and right. But if I click this button with my face, it all of a sudden becomes a shift key, and now I can basically look around. So one joystick lets me use two joysticks via the power shift. So the other thing I can kind of do is what I've set is I've set my buttons here to, this is now inventory, so this is going to pull up the inventory, and then this button here will basically tab through the inventory. So what are we going to get? Well, let's get some more mob eggs. Let's get a pig. It's always nice to get pigs. We'll get 5. No, we'll get a bunch of pigs. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to basically be out of this by using this button that I have here. The other thing I could have done is I could have held shift and hit this button. It's both kind of the same thing. So again, I'm going to look around, and this time I'm going to actually go to my pickaxe, and how I get to that is I basically bump over to pickaxe, and now I can basically mine using my pickaxe. You know, turn around. I probably shouldn't be mining in the middle of downtown Washington, but we'll see what kind of happens there. So yeah, still one hand, kind of maneuvering around. Whoops, it looks like I fell into a hole that I dug. So luckily I can just climb out of it using auto jump, which in Minecraft is really cool. So now that we've shown you how to use the pickaxe, let's actually have some fun. Let's actually spawn some parrots here. So I'm going to bump over to parrots, basically using this button. And then I'm going to hold down shift, and now I can spawn some parrots. Now, imagine someone in Washington, D.C. basically putting a bunch of parrots down. Let's have some more fun. Let's switch to pigs. We'll spawn some pigs. There's a pig. Piggy, piggy, piggy. All right. And that's how we use one joystick with the Xbox Adaptive Controller to play a one-handed Minecraft setup. Thank you for letting me talk with you today.
My name is Grover.
Sean. My name is Ian.
I'm Taylor.
My name is Owen, and I am 9.5 years old.
I only have 1.
And yeah.
I love video games, my friends, my family, and again video games.
Whenever I play it, it makes me feel happy.
The fun that you get to have with connecting with your friends.
You make your own rules?
It's his way of interacting with his friends when he can't physically otherwise do it.
When I'm playing with a regular controller, there's some things that don't work for me.
It's difficult for me to use both joysticks and the D-pad at the exact same time.
And it just slowed me down a bunch more, while other people were like...
She's never had the freedom to play at the level she knows she could.
I never thought it was unfair. I just thought, hey, this is the way it is and it's not going to change.
What I like about the adaptive controller is that now everyone can play.
I don't even have to look at the controller and just be like looking at the screen like, hey, yep.
You never want your kid to feel like an outsider or an other.
One of the biggest fears early on is, how will Owen be viewed by the other kids?
He's not different when he plays.
It's a little challenging, but that's the whole point of gaming.
I can hit the buttons just as fast as they can.
And I think I can crush my friends.
No matter how your body is or how fast you are, you can play. It's a really good thing to have in this world.